All right, we're recording. We got another session of the Midlife Wisdom Podcast. I've got John Marshall here as my guest today. And John, tell us a little bit about you. And our topic today, our working topic, is going to be financial wellness. And that's a big topic for midlife. So we got some interesting things to cover.
We do. I'm excited to be here, Mike. I think, as you know, this is my maiden podcast voyage, so we'll see how this goes. But happy to be here. And being a midlifer myself, yeah, there's a lot to this topic. But I have spent most of my time, most of my career, started out in the banking world, went through credit training, worked for some banks, worked for some non-bank finance companies. Spent a lot of my career as a corporate and commercial banker. Then I moved in, did some professional credentialing, and was blessed to have an opportunity to move to Northern Michigan about 20 years ago, my wife and I.
What year was that?
2004.
That's the year we moved here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I remember you saying that.
That's cool.
And I worked for a little bank here, and then started down the financial planning path about 18 years ago, and started a firm, little boutique firm, and I've been having a blast with it. Been very fortunate to work with a lot of wonderful people.
So one of the things that I read in your bio was you're a Chartered Financial Analyst, right? Is that how you say it? That's a very prestigious designation in the financial world. So you're laughing, but I know it's true. So because I read up on this, less than 200,000 people in the whole world have that. And for the financial world, that's huge. So let's go backwards, because I also found out you went to University of Michigan. Did you do finance?
Go blue.
And did you do finance at Michigan?
I didn't. I was a history major as an undergrad, and then I went on to grad school and finances. I was trying to find myself, if you will.
That's what college is about.
Exactly.
So I know that designation is, I'll call it a Wall Street designation, right? You got to have that to be running hedge funds and big stuff. What does that designation mean? Is the separate test, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And what does that allow you to do?
The CFA, or the Chartered Financial Analyst designation, is it's a in-depth finance education in investment and corporate finance, basically. And probably the easiest way to describe it is, in the world of finance, it's about 10 feet wide and 100 miles deep. And it's a 3-year program. Takes a lot of preparation time. Mm-hmm. It's not widely known outside of Wall Street, because that's where it's mostly utilized. But it and I did it originally as kind of a personal development thing before I was even working as a financial planner and investment advisor. Not exactly knowing how I'd use it, but I was working in banking and finance, and I figured the education one way or another wasn't going to hurt me. So it's nice to have it recognized. A lot of people do recognize it, but as far as
many people listening are getting introduced to the term today.
Probably, yeah. And at the end of the day, based on what I do now, we're not doing hours and hours of in-depth investment research, because a lot of that research has become so accessible. So I think it's just like any advanced education, it gives you a better understanding of your field in terms of trying to find appropriate fits for every client.
Sure.
In summary.
So thinking about clients, obviously you and I both have kids. We have You have a couple in college. I have my first. If we're thinking about a young adult leaving college, without sounding too much like a dad, what kind of financial advice do you give to that age group?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics, and there's 1,000 different ways to go with this. But I've had it's been enjoyable with my two kids as they've begun to express a little bit more interest in the topic as kind of moving into the working world at some point starts to become more real to them. And I think it's just the fundamentals, and that's really no different for anyone at any stage of life. Of spend less than you make
and save.
Yeah, it's spend, save, and give, and that I call them kind of the three pillars, and they're not of the give, save, and spend. And a lot of people get the save and the spend. They don't quite get the give, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that.
We'll get into that.
But it's really start early. It's the old, once you start putting away money for the long term, it's investing it, and it's time in the market, not timing the market. So it's just getting the inertia, the momentum, getting over the inertia and getting the momentum of putting some money away for the long term as soon as you can. And so that's really the basics of it. And if kids get that and they start to get a little bit of momentum, it's going to serve them well throughout their lives.
Right.
And so I think that's really from a high level where to start.
I heard someone say that compound interest is like the eighth wonder of the world.
It's the magic of compounding.
What historically, what percentage does somebody see over? I think it's like a 7 or 8 year period. You could almost double your money. Is that correct?
That is the rule of 7, I think they call it. I can't remember.
And do you see some of that in the financial world?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, it depends on what you're invested in. If you're invested in stock fund versus a savings account at the bank. And that,
sure.
Again, we go real deep there, but that's kind of comes down to, for everyone, hey, what's the purpose of these dollars? What that you're saving? Is it long term? Are you saving for 5 years to buy a house? You need to save a couple years for a car. Well, you're going to invest it differently and expect different returns based on the purpose of your money.
Speaking of buying a house, we kind of felt a bubble go through our economy in that 2020 year. House prices have soared in our area.
Yes.
What causes that? So we now have an issue with a newlywed couple being able to finance and purchase a home.
Right.
The starter homes are getting bought up by investors.
Yeah.
What's the Airbnb?
Yeah.
Those things, they make good money. They make good return on money, but they're changing economies. Like if you go on the lake today, people don't grow up on the lake. It's all rental homes.
Yeah.
So it's a different thing. How did that happen?
There's probably a lot of things you could point to, but I think it really boils down to a supply-demand issue, like a lot of things do. And there's just, I think in certain areas, our area maybe being one, you can point to some zoning issues that may limit the volume of new construction. Every area has its unique features. Ours is a beautiful area where we're fortunate to live here on a year-round basis, but there's a whole lot of people that want to retire here or have second homes here from other parts of the country that may think our prices here
are relative
cheap to where they're coming from
are cheap.
It's still a pretty good deal.
And sometimes that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's just it really, in many cases, it's a supply demand issue, but it's no question for younger people trying to get started and buying that first house is kind of that big step in the American dream. It's become difficult in certain areas, but there are other areas of the country that aren't as impacted as say we've been.
I read a stat that was This is interesting. There's currently more real estate agents than homes for sale in the United States.
Wow. I had not heard that.
There's a gentleman, Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote a book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he was real funny. I listened to him one time, and he said, when he gets out of the real estate market is when he's checking out the grocery store and the bagger tells him he's becoming a realtor. That's when he knows it's time to get out. And we're kind of there. I can't believe how many people tell me they're doing real estate. And that's a cutthroat business.
It is.
And when people are making money, it looks great, but they don't see the downside. There was a gentleman that works in a very exclusive community up here, and he said in 2008 he made $8,000.
Wow.
For the year selling homes. So not many people could survive on $8,000 trying to raise a family. So it's interesting.
It really is. And, now there's been some changes to the laws affecting realtors and commissions and how commissions are charged and that are changing that industry too.
Have those went through?
I believe they are in effect, and I'm not well versed enough in what those changes are, but it's impacting kind of that standard 6% commission, I think, that sellers have, and then you're going to have seller realtors and buyer realtors.
Trying to separate that percentage.
And make it, I think, more competitive, so people are maybe pricing one realtor off of another, and which I wouldn't think would be a bad thing, but
definitely
I don't
changes
know
the market.
It does, for sure.
Another one I had is there's risk with investing, but there's different levels of risk. There was a surgeon down in Traverse City. I can't remember the name of the development, but right outside of Acme, to the right, there was like a subdivision, a high-end subdivision. He put all of his life savings into that and went bankrupt. So development's a unique beast, right? There's a lot of elements to development. If you don't sell enough homes quick enough, you don't recover. What kind of risk is there with investing with you versus trying to develop?
Yeah, we could spend about 3 podcasts on that one. But, it's interesting because in our client meetings, we talk a lot about risk. And I'll try to not talk about this forever. But, the most, I guess, widely... The risk that most people are aware of when it comes to investing is market risk. Their investments go up, they go down. There's volatility, and obviously they're more focused on the downside risk.
Sure.
I wake up one morning and I log into my account and it's down 20% from where it was yesterday. That's the most common risk that I find is at the forefront of everyone's minds. Everybody's aware about it. And so when we have these conversations with clients or managing portfolio for, we're doing planning for, is we have to, especially during times of market volatility, people's blinders, their focus tends to narrow down to just that. I just lost 20, my account went down 20%, or they think they lost. And you have to say, that's on paper. You're not using that money for 10, 15, 20 years. And if you want higher returns, you need to be able to
stomach it,
handle a little bit more volatility.
Sure.
But there's other risks that tend to get ignored during those times, and those are such as liquidity risk.
Not having enough cash.
Not having enough cash. The type of investment, marketability. So if you got real estate versus a mutual fund, it's a whole lot easier. I can sell a mutual fund today and have cash in my account tomorrow. Well, real estate, you maybe go to the bank, maybe get a home equity line, but that's going to take you time. That's going to cost money. So that's the marketability, the liquidity risk of it. And then for a lot of people for whom we're doing planning for long term, there's a risk of running out of money that tends to get forgotten, in the moment of the downside or the high volatility, because people, we have to remind them, hey, we're investing for a 20, 30 plus year time period. So what happens today, the next 6 months, or the next 3 years in the market to your portfolio has very, very little effect on how much money you're going to have in 30 years, say. And here's the goals and objectives. So this is the key part of the planning, is understanding those clients' goals and objectives. Hey, I want to spend X dollars a year. I want to take my family on a around the world trip at some point. Whatever they might be, those can be very personal. And we say, if we change your investment strategy, which we can do, then you better be prepared to change what your goals and objectives are 25, 30 years down the road, because it might feel better in the near term that, well, I know that my accounts, I'm not going to wake up and see my account down 20% tomorrow. Sure. But okay, that's fine. But you might wake up in 30 years and say, wow, I didn't have the right asset allocation, meaning I didn't take enough risk early on to grow my assets at a time when I didn't need the cash, but and I could wait it out, but I didn't take enough of that risk. And again, it comes back to that time in the market, so that you can endure that volatility and maintain that long term.
What is that growth in the market? Is that growth in GDP? It's
the growth in the value of the securities in your portfolio, which
so companies becoming more valuable.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another stock, or another just quick point of risk that you kind of mentioned with the concentration risk, is what you talked about with the example of the person you knew had all their money in a single development. You get people with concentration risk in a single stock or a couple of stocks. And a classic example that we've seen fairly frequently, and it's an interesting conversation from a psychology standpoint, also from a risk standpoint, is, we have some clients that have a stock. Apple's kind of a classic example. It's made them millionaires. Yep. Apple stock has made them millionaires. So when they bought it 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't a concentration.
$50 a share.
Or less.
Or less.
And they held it and took the long-term view. Well, now it has grown to the point where they're retiring it, and it may make up 50% of their net worth.
Ooh.
And they'll come in and, we'll look at it and say, you ought to be more broadly diversified. And that would entail you selling. Our advice to you would be to reduce the weighting of this Apple holding. And we'll get a couple of, most people kind of get that, but we've also had people look at us like we're aliens, like, this has made me rich. But, we kind of have to remind them.
It can also make you unrich.
Right. It'd be like you from a medical standpoint saying, maybe this person, I don't know, this is probably a terrible example, but they ate sugar or a terrible diet and they're still healthy and they're 60 years old, and you're saying, hey, you need to change your diet. And they're going, why do I need to change my diet? Well,
that's
you're
not a bad example.
Well,
it actually plays into what I talk about all the time. It's I'll have somebody come in, for instance, obesity is a big thing we struggle with. And I talk about the storm coming from behind that you can't see. So if you're looking forward and it's sunny, no problem, but you don't see what's coming. And I've had people literally tell me, hey, my blood tests are great, blah, 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 blah. 6 months later, cancer diagnosis. I'm like, these things come, they're a risk with that kind of lifestyle. So you are right.
Exactly, because it's one company, and that can be put at risk. And there's numerous examples: Enron,
sure,
MCI,
Google, Tesla,
all of these, But I mean, to the point where a stock seems bulletproof, and you get a rogue executive in there, or something, or a bad audit, and the company goes bankrupt. I mean, MCI was kind of a classic back several years ago. So, and it's those things where I have to say, it's your money. You can do this, but if I, as a professional, I'm sitting in front of a judge, and this judge asks me, is your advice to them to put half of their net worth in a single stock?"
Absolutely not.
I'd be out of work. So it's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, investing is very interesting. Yeah. So it's nice to be able to generate a little extra to do that. Let's talk about the parents in midlife that are interested in putting some money away for college.
Yeah.
I've heard of a 529 plan.
Yep.
Tell me all about that.
So there's different forms of 529 plans, but basically the 529 is an IRS code that covers this area of saving and investing. And the idea from a high level is you can save into these plans. You either have, I guess, what you'd call independent plans that you can buy through any sort of most custodians, the big wirehouses, or there's also state-based plans. And since we're in Michigan, I'm somewhat familiar with that.
You could buy a bond from Michigan.
Well, you actually open an account through the Michigan 529 plan, and you can put money in there. You get a deduction off of your state income taxes up to a certain amount, and then that money grows. You can invest it in mutual funds and you can invest it for growth in preparation for your kids going to college. So if you do it as a newborn, roughly 18 years, and you can change that allocation as they get closer to using it, so you don't have as much market risk like we just talked about. And then when you use it for education, and the uses related to that, go beyond just tuition, books and some other things. It's pretty liberal in what you can use it for, which is nice. When the money comes out, the growth is tax-free if it's used for one of those qualified purposes. So they call it a triple tax benefit. You get a deduction on your state when you put it in. You don't pay any taxes on an ongoing basis while the money's growing, and you don't pay any when it comes out if it's used for those purposes. So that's kind of just the standard investing account. Michigan also, and other states have this too, what's called a prepaid plan. So you can the state gives you a price, kind of a lump sum price that you can put in on I think it's now on a per credit basis. When we did it for our kids, it was on a per semester or term basis, and you can basically buy that term ahead of time and today's prices and lock it in
20 years.
Yeah. Lock it in. And so, some combination of those are great tools.
Any other vehicles to save for college?
There are, the Roth IRA is a great tool that can be used. Its kind of original purpose was a retirement savings tool, but it has some features to it that can be useful for paying for college. So it's kind of, you can be using it for multiple purposes, really.
What does the IRA part of it stand for?
So individual retirement account.
Okay. So somebody would set that up, and then they could use some of that funds for school.
The Roth could be used, the principal amount you put into it, without getting too far into the weeds. Yeah.
Everyone's heard about like a 401k.
Sure.
What's the difference between those two?
Okay. So a 401k is an employer-based plan, or another term for that is, again, these are all IRS codes. 403b if you work for a hospital or a public
like
organization,
a nonprofit or something. Yeah.
And where you have these are called qualified plans. You make as a participant, you can defer some of your income in it. These now been a lot of changes taking effect with Secure Act 2.0 and that over the last few years. But again, high level, you can contribute some of your own earnings. Typically, there's some sort of employer match, perhaps a profit sharing contribution from your employer beyond that. So they're very useful tools for saving for retirement versus, say, an IRA that we just talked about. That is not an employer-based plan. You
That's
can have,
separate.
there are certain types of simple IRA or a SEP IRA that are employer-based. But if we're just talking about a traditional IRA or a traditional Roth IRA, those are anybody can open them up. If you've got some earnings, you need to have some earnings to be eligible to make a contribution to it. And then there's an annual contribution threshold. And those, we keep kind of bringing it back to kids or young people. Those Roth IRAs is a great tool for getting young people started and saving. Yeah,
Let's say somebody's listening and they have a medium-sized business. They have 50 employees. Is your financial practice advising just individuals, or could somebody with a business say, "Hey, I want to set up 401ks for my business"? Is that something you help with?
All of the above.
You do. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And then are those 401ks typically invested into the market?
Usually they have an investment lineup within them through which the participant can either select on their own. There's also funds in there that are, they call them target date funds. So it's basically the investment allocation is adjusted based on the time to retirement. So you could have something that's say a 2055 fund. So somebody who today is 30 years roughly from thinking they're going to need those funds in retirement. And so there are those types of funds in there too, where it's pretty low maintenance. They make their contribution, they select that fund, their contributions get reinvested in it, and then the allocation is adjusted as time goes on for them. So they're not having to go on, well, should I sell my small cap fund, or put more into my intermediate bond fund kind of thing. It's done for them.
And then you would meet with obviously a business owner, but then the employees too?
Correct.
Yeah.
So on the plan consulting side, work with a business owner, kind of understand what their objectives are for providing the benefit to their employees.
Keeping employees.
That's one of them. Yeah, that's a big one. And attracting them. And it's like having a health insurance benefit, the 401k or the retirement plan, whatever it might be. It might not always be a 401k. It might not be the best fit. It might be something like a simple IRA, SEP IRA. So it's identifying kind of what's the best plan for that business, and that can be driven by, how much does the employer want to contribute? It can be driven by their, how much oversight. There's a fair amount of regulatory scrutiny and fiduciary oversight that's required with, say, a 401k versus, say, a simple IRA. So that's kind of the consulting piece with the employer to help identify what the best plan is for them, for their objectives and their participants. And then once that's decided, there's the piece of helping with the participants to say, how much should you be saving, and where should you be investing it, and where should you be saving if there's a Roth option or a pre-tax option based on what's your tax situation, how much you're making, those kind of things.
Yeah, good question. Good answers to those kind of questions. As we're thinking with the financial stuff, someone's now in midlife. They've sold a business.
Yeah,
they're coming into some money. There's some tax implications. Could a person like that get some guidance? I know they're going to probably need an attorney, maybe a CPA. Is that something you also help with? Like, is that a person that you're like, all right, we gotta limit our tax liability, and here's how we do that professionally?
That's probably one of the biggest areas in which we help clients. And you use the example of selling a business, but it's at that midlife spot. So somebody comes in, a lot of people come in and they've been doing the heavy lifting. They're working, they're making money, they're saving, they're spending less than they make. They've built up a nice nest egg. Maybe there's a forthcoming business sale or a stock option opportunity or whatever it may be. And the question is like, hey, I've been doing all these things, and we're like, way to go. But what does this all mean in in retirement? We can go down that rabbit hole too. Or retirement means so many different things to so many different people. But in terms of what does it mean when the time comes for me to start using it, and how do I use it? So you've been in this accumulation stage, and then we call it kind of this transition to decumulation, or to, and there's a lot of variables there in terms of how do I structure an income in retirement? Where am I going to start pulling money from, depending on what your different types of resources are, to be as tax efficient as I can be for the next, again, 30 years or so? Because then you're looking at, Social Security claiming. Well, when should we be doing that? Should I be delaying? Should I be holding off? You've got required minimum what's called RMDs, or required minimum distributions, from some of these retirement accounts.
You have to take some money out.
You have to take some money out at certain ages. So it's, if you've got that sale of a business, we're talking with owners to say, let's talk about, and they're CPAs, and we're kind of in the fun position of being the quarterback, so we're talking to the CPA, we're talking to the attorney, and we have some training in those areas. We certainly don't hold ourselves out as CPAs or attorneys, but that's kind of part of the certified financial planning piece, where
the strategy.
And we can take that off the client's plate, so the client knows their advisors are talking. They're not trying to play middleman, and what does they use that nomenclature? You use that verbiage. What does
what's
it mean?
going on? Yeah.
And then how do you structure it so that that sale is as tax efficient and effective as it can be? So in the process of trying to structure a mutually beneficial deal for you and the buyer. So that's the fun stuff.
I don't know if you know this, but I was 3 classes from my CPA exam when I switched.
You were? Holy cow. God bless you.
Yeah. So when I entered, I went to a small Christian college, Goshen College.
Yeah.
Entered the accounting. First class, like basic accounting, was like 200 kids. By the time I got to advanced accounting, there was 8 of us left. This is really cool. My professor and also my advisor was the former controller for Harley-Davidson.
Interesting.
His name was Russ Roop. And I remember taking a test in cost accounting.
That's a fun one.
And I was like down to the pennies. And I was like, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
I turned my test in and I said, I'm changing my major. He goes, no, you're not. He goes, my placement rate's 100%, which he goes, with his name in the industry, he called any company you were working, because you're getting trained under the former controller for Harley-Davidson. I turned in my tests and changed my major to pre-med. And here we are today, 20 years later.
That's God had a plan, man. That's accounting's it's a great field. It's we call it the language of business. You learn a lot about accounting. I talked to my boys are in business school. One of them's not going that path. The other one's still trying to figure it out. And it's in terms of the young people topic, if you're somewhat interested in business and you kind of get accounting, it's kind of, as you experience, it's kind of one of those things, you get it, you got to grind in it academically, but you get it, or if you don't, you go pre-med, I guess. But,
you could change directions. Mine, I guess what I figured out was I was more of a healer. That was my personality.
Yeah.
And so it just...
That makes sense.
Yeah, it worked. It's worked out really good.
I took enough accounting to declare a finance major, but accounting, I think the older I've gotten, it's become more appealing to me. I don't know why, but...
Like reading those financial statements?
I guess. Yeah.
Profit and loss. Well, yeah, right. Once you read them enough, it's kind of like you can just see what's going on.
Right. Yep, so, it tells you a lot if you know what you're looking at.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so if we're moving kind of up, let's talk about inheritance. Like if you have some money and now you're talking about, like, I think you said Did you use the word de-investing? What was that phrase?
Decumulation.
Yeah, because you don't want to keep accumulating. Speaking of,
You don't want to fully decumulate either.
not before you
Right.
expire.
Right.
I take care of a small group of people that are very financially well-to-do. One of the things along that line that I found real interesting is everybody gets to an age where they start to downsize. They don't want multiple homes. They don't want large homes. I've always found that really fascinating that people go through that process where, and when they're talking to me, they're talking about the emotional, when it has you, when you've got too much. So it's real interesting when I hear people describing what's going on with that. But as you're starting to get into that phase, how could somebody transfer some of their wealth to kids? What part of the strategy, and where do you come in on that?
And that's another topic we could probably spend three podcasts on, the whole psychology piece of and relational dynamic piece of estate planning and inheritance. That's fascinating, but
it's biblical.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
The Bible talks about leaving the wealth to the kids.
Yeah. But wow, there's a lot. And I've been through it a little bit in my own family, and I've been through it a lot with clients. The emotion is very high, and it's interesting how those relational dynamics going back to childhood
start popping up.
Right? Have maybe been latent for 40 years. And they start popping up between siblings. And the bigger the family, the more siblings, the more complicated it gets. It's fascinating, but it's really challenging. So, kind of give you a fairly succinct answer to your question. In terms of beginning to pass some assets to kids. Probably the simplest way, and right now is you can gift up to, I think it's $19,000 a year. I'd have to check. It changes every year, but I think you can gift $19,000 a year to anybody without any additional tax form filing. If you go over that, it's still not a problem. You just have to file an additional tax form because there's a lifetime gifting exemption as well when it comes to some of that. But so that's an easy way. So a couple, if a mom and a dad are doing some gifting to kids, they could each on a combined basis, give away $38,000 to anybody. So that's a very simple way to kind of start that process. In terms of gifting to kids. Now you start talking about gifting to charities, 501c3 designated organizations. There's other methods for that as well.
We're given.
Correct.
Is there an age where you have to start having that conversation? And
with your kids?
With your financial advisor?
Yeah, I mean, that's all part of kind of understanding what are your objectives, So kind of get it on the radar screen. And obviously, when you're putting a plan together for somebody when they first retire, depending on what their asset situation is, what their spending needs are and all of that, that might be farther down the priority list because they, want to take care of themselves first and not be a burden in many cases to kids or to other dependents. But as people start getting along further in life and that becomes less of a, not necessarily a priority, but a concern, their wealth is held up well or what have you, then the conversations are, these are fun conversations. What am I going to do with this money?
Yeah.
I'll take a little bit of segue if I have the liberty to do that on that, because that's an interesting piece is people who have built up wealth over many years, and a lot of it being because they were disciplined, they were frugal, and they've arrived at a place that they never imagined they'd be in terms of wealth that they've built up, and they're struggling with, the fun part for us is, hey, if you're having any doubt about wanting to take your kids on a European vacation, do it.
Take them.
But those habits don't change easily.
The frugality,
the discipline. It's just people aren't going to change who they are, but hopefully there's some value in it that they get from someone like us saying, none of us, that includes people in the business, can be objective with our own money. And so, to be the third set of eyes, if you will, to hopefully, you've got the professional training they trust to say, hey, you can do this, and
it's not going to hurt you.
Be it gifting, be it supporting an organization, being taking that bucket list trip, whatever it might be. So, but it's an interesting mindset.
Where does a trust come into that? Like, what if a family had a lot of money, and they want to set up a trust? What kind of financial vehicle is that?
That's another one, Mike. Geez, we could. I got about 5 textbooks on my bookshelf we can talk about. But generally, a trust. A lot of we meet with a fair number of people that think they need a trust, and they don't necessarily need a trust. And it isn't
because
that
their assets aren't high enough, or what?
Not necessarily. It's just, again, what are their objectives? And with a kind of the primary reasons for a trust are usually to, in the case of you have somebody with special needs, say a special needs child, or someone where you're, I think that they refer to as controlling from the grave, if you will. But you're trying to, when they inherit the money, the trust, you put the terms in the trust to dictate the
how the money's
disbursements.
used. Sure.
So if you've got minor kids, okay, you got a fair amount of wealth, right? You don't want the kids or somebody who's got an irresponsible track record, or again a special needs person, where you need to have a trustee there who's gonna, ensure that those assets are utilized to take care of their needs.
Are the assets typically invested?
Sure.
Yeah,
usually. And then, you have, in the case of privacy, if you have assets that aren't subject to probate, okay? So if you have, a house, or you have bank accounts or something, a non-retirement account, then, you utilize a trust to title the assets in the name of the trust, so that, those assets in the trust bypass probate, meaning, when you pass away, there's not an ad put in the paper that, hey, so-and-so passed away, and the creditors have a certain amount of time to notify the estate if there's anything owed. So there's a privacy piece to it that can be appealing to people. And probate, a lot of that process can take time depending on where you are. If you're in, my parents were in South Florida. South Florida has a lot of retired people. The probate courts, that process is a long time. It takes a long time. So assets could be tied up in there that the executor of the estate could use to be paying other funeral expenses or anything else. So in other areas, from what I understand up here, the probate process is pretty darn efficient. So it's not like your assets I haven't experienced here, but are going to be tied up for long. And then the other piece is the estate tax issue, which, as it sits today, the inheritance or estate tax exemption is at somewhere in the neighborhood of $12+ million per person, so probably around 26 million for a couple. Now, that could be changing with the new tax law, if there are new tax laws, or if that's changed. But there seems to be some agreement, although there's little anywhere else, that should be at a level perhaps not as high as it currently is, but be at a level where a a very high percentage of people would not be impacted
Bumping
by it.
against 12 million.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's
So-
an old joke that said, money's not that important. It just keeps the kids around longer.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
some of that estate planning stuff
Yeah.
would be definitely pretty good for that.
You know, on the estate plan, one of the topics that we run into on that up here, for a lot of these, second homes or summer properties, lake homes, that people, maybe bought or built many years ago that are now moving to the next generation. And that's really where you talk about a challenge in terms of those things passing on, because the hope is, there's a lot of emotion, tends to be a lot of emotion, great emotion with those properties, wonderful family time, celebrations that people
3 generations
experience.
there sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But passing those on, and there's a whole specialty area, cottage law, really, that is
That's what it's
around-
called.
Yeah, about
Interesting.
and I think the guy who wrote the book basically was from Suttons Bay, but and those things highly charged emotionally, and there's a lot of documentation that can be put in place. But then you get, say a family has 4 or 5 kids. Well, then you start to run
Do
into
they all own a
challenges.
percentage of the house?
Right.
Yeah.
Who gets the house when? Well, we love it up here year round, but I think we all have to admit that July and August are kind of the,
They're the peak.
they're the peak. So,
Sure.
how are you going to divvy up those months, and then the expenses or repairs, and maybe one sibling lives in California and isn't as interested in it, and hey, I just want the money for my portion, while maybe the others can or can't fund
Buy 'em
that
out,
portion.
right.
So it gets complicated. The success stories that I've seen, which are fewer than the unsuccessful stories, unfortunately, are as if the house gets passed down, and along with a big bucket of money designated solely
To
for
take care of the house.
taking care of the house and the repairs.
That's when it works well.
That's when it works, but you still have the time,
Yeah.
the usage issue.
Someone's got to
Yeah.
deal with it. I had heard a wealthy family that I knew, dad wanted to pass some money down to the kids. They had a house. I don't know how the kids acquired the house, whether it was gifted or sold or whatever. But then dad rented to the tune of something like $10,000 per month to each kid. That was the rent of the house. So he's paying out like $50,000, $60,000 a month in rent, but that's how he was giving it to the kids.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, and they were dealing with that same issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
5, 6, 7 kids trying to deal with one home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting area for sure. Emotionally charged.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of emotions around that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Wealth management.
Yeah.
What does that phrase mean to you?
That's a great question. And that's a term that probably over the last decade has gotten a lot of
Huge.
Traction.
Yes.
You
Yeah, you hear it a
everybody
lot.
likes to refer, in advertising and that, talk about wealth management, or again, there are professionals out there that call themselves wealth managers. And so I think I look at that term as, we believe it all starts with planning. If you have to have a full scope understanding of the client, what's important to them, and what their priorities and objectives and their goals are, and then helping them manage their resources, their wealth, if you will, in such a way that gives them the greatest opportunity at success of achieving those objectives and goals. That's
Does somebody that calls themselves a financial planner, can they do that?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean you manage. You're typically managing the resources, the wealth, in conjunction with the plan.
Yeah,
But you
gotcha.
got to have the plan and understand the objectives and
you're
understand the
trying to
client
do.
before you
Sure.
can manage
Sure.
investments.
One of the things you and I talked about prior was the love of money.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories of people that have? You've got to have some interesting stories. Any of somebody that you've seen where the love of money has gotten in the way? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, always. Or, the Bible talks about it, very poignantly and pointedly.
Sure.
And
I think that's First Timothy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's important to point out it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. It's not, often gets construed as money is the root of all evil.
Yep.
It's the love of money. And so, everybody's got those stories of situations where making money, keeping money was typically making more money. It was the top priority, and everything else in their lives, family or health,
Just
obviously
takes a back seat.
Takes a back seat. And there's
I see that a lot.
Oh, sure.
Yep.
Sure you do.
Yep.
It's an interesting psychology because money is a tool. We need it to
function in this world that we've created.
Right,
yep.
Exactly. And it can be easily, it can become too high a priority, and to where you're sacrificing it. And ultimately, if you may have a ton of wealth, but if you don't have your health, or you've blown up all the relationships or the people that matter, what good is it?
Yeah, what have you really attained?
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I've tried really hard in my life to put a limit on that.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of limiting how much I work,
Yep.
so that you're not sucked into 6 days a week, rocking and just trying to make the finances the number one thing.
It's a balance, right? And there are times in life where you get to really grind and you really got to bust it, and some of those other things take back seat. But, doing it for long periods of time or having it become an obsession is where it gets dangerous. And kind of what we touched on a little bit earlier was that give piece to the spending and the saving. And that's really in terms of, again, talking to younger people, and not just younger people, because I'll be the first to admit it took me a lot of years, into my 40s probably, where I finally understood. Yeah, I knew, hey, you should give money away, give money to your church, help others. I get that, but so I really understood from a biblical standpoint that. You're so much better off. It's such a better plan to go through life open-handed than closed-handed. And I think that's a great illustration of a physical illustration of, hey, when you make money, you got a certain percentage. The Bible calls it tithing, that you're going to give away to, your church or other organizations or nonprofits or whatever that are important to you. And then you got the saving piece. You've got to put away money for the long term, and then you've got a spending piece, and there's the balance there. But that giving piece, I really think it helps us from a behavioral standpoint to not hold too tightly, to not make money too much of a priority. Or
the love of money.
Right.
Right back to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it would help people in that, maybe we'd call it like their fifth quarter. So they've retired, and now they're thinking about, hey, what's my worth?
Right.
And I don't work. One of the ways to find some of that purpose is to give to some causes that you're very passionate about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's more than giving money is. Give your time and your energy. That's another way.
Sure.
Other ways to give.
The life portion of my midlife, the reason that's an acronym is those are the 4 ways that we can improve our lives and improve others. And it stands for, I'm forgetting the L just off the top of my head. Labor, influence, finances, and expertise. And so those are 4 ways we can improve our own lives, and then 4 ways we can improve someone else's. And so the finances on there that's one way we could do it.
Right.
So
Right.
it's a really interesting thing to think about, because it does come in midlife,
Certainly.
and that's why I call this a midlife wisdom podcast. We start to become more aware
Exactly.
of who we are and what we're doing in this world in midlife.
It's true. I mean, and I've worked in the business and the profession, but like I said, that giving piece, yeah, it's important, but it didn't really resonate with me until I was too far into my adulthood, about how important it was from from a behavioral standpoint, from a mindset standpoint. And as we tell people, we do the planning, we crunch the numbers, look at the investments and do all that. But that's a pretty small percentage of what drives real successful outcomes financially. So much of it's behavioral. There's a guy who wrote a book called The Behavior Gap, and it's that self-control, it's that discipline, it's staying invested when things are bumpy, continuing to save, keeping your eye on the ball. In many cases, ignoring the news media who are they're there to make noise and grab eyeballs. And it's really that behavioral piece that is going to drive the great majority of success.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if somebody listening says, wow, this is an interesting conversation, I find myself in one of those scenarios that we kind of went over, how does somebody get in touch with you?
We're located here in Petoskey. We serve clients everywhere, so
the benefit of the internet.
Yep, exactly. Our website is www.crookedtreecapital.com.
Nice.
I work with a couple of other great advisors, and the head honcho, who's my wife, who runs the office.
Runs the show.
Yes, and
Shout out
to be
to
run.
Joan.
Yes, I need to be run. So
Yeah.
I'd be
The real financial wizard.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of this for anybody that's looking around at anything. I encourage people, interview a few people. And, one of the biggest things we try to achieve, because we think it's the best outcome for everyone, is to just have a sit-down meeting and talk, get to know people. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Where have you been in life? What's important to you? What's your relationship with money? I mean, that's a big one. And because fit for the client, fit for us, we want to make sure there's a fit, because if there's not, it's a exercise in frustration for both people.
So you're talking like the scarcity mindset kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if someone comes in with that, do you try to change it, or you just say this might not be a good fit?
Well, it depends. You got to peel back that onion, the abundance versus the scarcity mindset. And again, this is another one that kind of gets back to that given. For me, it took me a long time to kind of understand that. And I have a much smarter, younger, better looking nephew who's working in the business who really kind of shed the light on it for me. And as opposed, we go through so much. Again, it's that close-handed versus open-handed thing, and trying to find a mutually beneficial outcome. And sure, do we need to save for a rainy day? Absolutely. But I think living from a point of abundance, that your winning doesn't mean my losing, is I think it's just a much more better, a much more positive approach, and drives better outcomes ultimately.
Who is your nephew that plans with you?
What's his name?
Yeah.
Leland Gross.
You have another advisor with you too?
Oh, that's my nephew is not with me. He's got a practice down in Virginia Beach. So shout out to him too for those people in his neighborhood. But
Who's the one that's working with you?
Bill Hansen and Courtney Fawn are two of the other advisors.
One of my buddies, when I told him that I was going to have you on, he's like, "Oh, Billy Hansen's my guy."
Yeah.
So he's got all his money invested with Billy.
Yeah, Billy's another. He's younger, smarter, and better looking than I am. And he puts up with me, so I appreciate him.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, hey, John, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been amazing going over this stuff. And like you said, we could, in the future, if there's something we want to go deep on the financial stuff, we'll see if we get some interest or some people asking some questions.
Would love to.
But finances are big, so.
Yeah, appreciate it. Really happy to be here and would love to dive deeper on any of these topics. Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you.
Hey, thank you guys for listening to the podcast. We appreciate it, and we're going to sign off. So have a great week.